My name is Jeanne Felter. I am currently the program director for the Community and Trauma Counseling Master's Program at Philadelphia University. I have a master's in counseling and a Ph.D. in education psychology, and I'm a licensed professional counselor. I've worked a good bit of my career in community mental health and primarily in school-based mental health before moving into higher education. I recognized trauma as an issue, I think, like a lot of other people have, through a lot of trial and error. I came out of my graduate training feeling like I was armed with all of the skills and competencies I needed to work effectively with children and families. I was steeped in theory. I was really good at relationship building. I knew how to engage in ethical practice. And then I started working in some of the most underserved and under-resourced communities in Philadelphia. And the interventions that I felt really confident in were failing. And I had great treatment plans, and they were falling flat. And so I'm intuitive, I'm a relational person, and I decided to throw all of that aside and just be with the families I was working with. And the more time I spent with them and the more I listened and observed, the more comfortable they felt with me and their stories emerged. And it began to make sense that these diagnoses that I was very familiar with, ADHD and oppositional defiant disorder and conduct disorder and autism, there was so much more going on for these children and for these families. And I just started to dive in. I dove into the literature, I dove into the little trainings that I could find back then. There were very few. And there were people that started to speak to me, Judith Herman and Dan Hughes. I had an opportunity to hear Sandy Bloom, to sit with Steve Berkowitz, folks like that who are really important local experts in this. And I started to recognize that I was not alone in what I was observing and experiencing, and I started to arm myself with the necessary foundation that is requisite. It is so much more important than the intervention. As a school-based mental health provider, I was learning a lot of this in the trenches. So while I was working, I was gathering information, I was forming relationships that were mentoring for me in this work. And I started to push against the systems a little bit, and in some cases a little too much. In fact, I lost a job once for pushing too hard. But I squeaked long enough and loud enough, and sometimes to the right people, that I began to be invited in to provide professional developments to teachers. I really felt as a therapist in a school, I was one person working with over 600 kids. But the teachers were the front line, and so I needed to get to the teachers, and they needed this information. And I started to gain opportunities to provide kind of trauma 101 trainings for teachers. Even if it was an hour and a half or 2 hours, it was really eye-opening for folks. And those teachers wanted more, which was wonderful. So being able to provide professional development to school administrators, teachers, school counselors has been a really amazing part of the work that I've done in schools. Because of that, they have allowed me to create social-emotional curriculums that are based on a trauma-informed perspective, where in partnership with the teachers, I'm teaching kids about their brains, and I'm teaching them not just emotion regulation skills, but they're understanding why their behaviors are, why they're acting this way. Teachers are understanding why, so they're learning together. That has been really powerful. But I think the most powerful change that I've been able to create has been that I've taken this learning and I've had an opportunity to pay it forward in graduate education. So while I was working full-time in schools, I was offered an opportunity to teach in a very prestigious counselor ed program in the city. I was a part-time faculty member and a full-time clinician. And nowhere in the curriculum was there anything about trauma, much like my graduate training. But I felt it really important to start talking about it. So even in a general theories course or an ethics course or a human development course, I was bringing in case examples and engaging in problem-based learning and teaching about neurobiology and biochemistry. And these students who were actively involved in clinical placements were leaning in like I had never seen them lean in. They were incredibly excited, and this information helped them to make sense of what they were seeing and experiencing in their clinical practice. And so I began to fight a little bit for curricular change. And that comes with a lot of obstacles and a lot of resistance. But I felt it really necessary. And I was eventually offered an opportunity at another local university to direct and be the founding director of a brand new program that I could build from the ground up that would really provide what many of us believe are the necessary foundational skills, knowledge, competencies to be able to do this work well today. So our master's program is one of the only programs in the country that has a fully integrated trauma curriculum. There are many programs that are recognizing the need to expand the knowledge that they're providing their students, and so they'll create a trauma track or a few advanced level courses for those who want to specialize in trauma. Our program stands firm behind the belief that this is not a specialization, that being a person that is sensitive to the impact of trauma, aware of the impact of trauma, and has competencies and skills to be able to address and heal is mandatory. It's required. So even in our foundational coursework that is required in every counseling program throughout the country, we're talking about trauma. We don't understand how you can teach about human development without talking about trauma. We don't understand how you can teach about ethical practice without talking about trauma, psychopathology, even career development, which is a staple in a counseling program. Think about the career changes that happen as a result of trauma and the sensitivity that folks who do career counseling have to have. So in addition to those foundational courses, we offer a lot of advanced courses, so advanced interventions in trauma, which is not a course focused on evidence-based practice. It's really focused on what is consistent among effective approaches. So foundational and yet advanced. We have a full course on neurobiology, which is that AHA course for all of our students, and I think it is a required course for anybody that does this work. We have a specific course on childhood trauma. We have also disaster mental health, and advanced courses in crisis intervention, things like that. I'm not certain that every program needs to evolve to be the type of program that we are, but I do think that the bar needs to be raised in graduate training, whether it's counseling, social work, medicine, certainly clinical psych programs. Anybody that is in the trenches, that is working day in and day out with people, schools of education. I think the curriculum needs to change. And so you ask how our program is having an impact. What I'm noticing is that when I reach out to community mental health providers and I say, will you take our students? And I sit with them and I talk about our curriculum. They are so excited to welcome these students in. And we have wonderful students, but they're not necessarily the most academically prepared folks. We're really dedicated to having people that have done this work. We have grandmothers that are in the program. We have people that have been incarcerated for a period of time. We have a very diverse group of students, and we're providing them the information that they need to take this forward, to take this work forward. So we've had a lot of success in building and forging strong partnerships with community providers. Not only do they want our students, but they ask, how can your students help to train our staff? And so we provide a lot of trainings to our community providers. We help our students to do that. A lot of their projects are related to how they can help impact the systems that they're working in. I've learned a lot of lessons in the work that I've done. One is that one person can make a difference, but gathering others that are like-minded is really important. I feel really fortunate in Philadelphia to be surrounded by so many like-minded people. I've had a lot of opportunities to connect with people who just seem to get it. And I felt very alone early in my career, so I think that it's really wonderful to build those relationships and those connections. I have also learned that pushing too hard against systems that are not ready is not the right approach. And I've taken a lot of this learning from Sanctuary and from Sandy Bloom's contributions to our program and to a lot of the organizations in the city. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to get people ready for change. I've learned a ton from the children and the families that I've worked with. I've learned to always question a diagnosis, to trust your gut, and to dedicate most of your energy to advocating for those that don't have the resources that you do. And in our program, in our master's program, we're really trying hard to teach students to be excellent in the room as clinicians, but we're also teaching them to have their ear to the ground and to pay attention to systems and policies and procedures that are re-traumatizing, and to advocate for change, to become change agents. I am really proud of our city. I'm very encouraged by how important the topic of trauma has become. I love seeing that our superintendent of schools is making a mandate that all school personnel will be equipped to address the needs of trauma-affected children. I love that our commissioner of the Department of Behavioral Health is leading a charge in creating a trauma-informed city. My worry is that trauma-informed is often associated with evidence-based practice, and the idea that people need to be certified in an evidence-based practice, and that will make them trauma competent. And that has not been my experience. I have worked with a lot of people who have every certificate on their wall, and they don't have the foundational information that's necessary to help heal or make change. So what I would love in our city is for a careful consideration of standards. There's a lot of terms thrown around: trauma-aware, trauma-sensitive, trauma-competent. I think competency is very aspirational. I think in a human service field, we're never competent. We're always striving towards that. But let's set some standards. Let's raise the bar for what it means to really know how to do this work and to appropriately help and heal. And let's steer away from a strong focus on evidence-based practice. I think there is so much merit to being trained in evidence-based intervention, but without the foundational knowledge, it's unimportant. If I look into the future and think about what it may look like to be a trauma-informed city and to have trauma-informed systems, I think I'd be out of a job. And in many ways, the work that I'm doing in the city is an attempt to put myself out of work in higher education. Our program is raising the bar, and we're setting higher standards for what education means, what appropriate training should be. And if we do this work well, then my program will not stand alone, that all programs will have very similar experiences and trainings for professionals. I think about clinical work, and I think about how much time and energy goes into changing people's minds. And in a trauma-informed city, the energy would be where it should be, and that is in helping to heal. Early on in my career, I was working in a school in Philadelphia. It was a turnaround charter school, which means that the charter system took over a failing school, a neighborhood school, and they kept all of the neighborhood children, but predominantly kicked out all of the adults and brought in a force of young educators that had a lot of energy and enthusiasm for teaching. And they set very high expectations and were very good at establishing routines and consistency, and for most kids that was really life-changing for their education. But my job as the therapist in the school was to work with those kids that were not benefiting from the structure. They were still acting out. And this happened to be an elementary school, and very early in the first few days, I was told to glue myself to a 5-year-old boy. And this boy was very new to school. He's a kindergartner. He came in with a diagnosis of autism, and that was all that we knew. And in observing him in the classroom, he had a lot of the signs and symptoms of autism. He was very detached. He had a lot of repetitive and self-stimulating behaviors. He wouldn't make eye contact. He was very explosive. He was rigid, and when he became agitated, he would throw books and bite people and hide under desks. So I could see where that diagnosis came from. The more time I spent with him, the more comfortable he became with me, and I started to notice that he had relational skills and that he was feeling safe with me, and even communicating with me. He was nonverbal, but he was communicating with me in a lot of important ways. One day in his kindergarten class, he became, I wasn't there, he became incredibly explosive, tried to hurt a teacher, hurt another student, and the school had called his parents. They were going to suspend him. And while they were waiting for Mom, he was with me in my office for several hours. They couldn't get in touch with Mom. Mom had never come in for an intake with me. She had signed the papers, sent them in his backpack, so she was not somebody that was available to me. The school was unsuccessful at reaching Mom, so they called her paramour. And, this little boy who was sitting on my lap at this time, doing a puzzle and engaging not in parallel play, but very interactive play with me, heard the boots coming down the hallway. And that was not a new sound for him. And he jumped up out of my lap and he peeked around the corner and he saw his mom's boyfriend coming, and it was the most animalistic response, fear response I have ever seen. In that moment, he hurt me. He destroyed my office. This child who had just been nuzzling next to me was fearful for his life in that moment. And thankfully, the school didn't have permission to let the child leave with this man. And a child line call led to an investigation that proved that he had been repeatedly abused sexually and physically by this paramour, and that his mother was actively addicted to many substances. And consequently, this little boy was put into therapeutic foster care. And it was like an angel. This woman came into his life. She was the most nurturing and loving caregiver. And within 3 weeks, he was talking. He was sitting at his desk coloring. We had never seen him hold a pen or a crayon. but he had made so many gains that were really incredible that the diagnosis of autism was just thrown away. This was not what he was experiencing. What he was experiencing was abuse, neglect, chaos in his home. And the behaviors that we were seeing were survival mechanisms. They were fear and survival. The story doesn't end well. We talk about all of the barriers and the resistance that exists today. Systems can be re-traumatizing. Kids are put back into homes that are unsafe. And this child was reunited with his family, and we saw his behavior regress immediately. So it is, that child impacted me, left an indelible mark. It is because of kids like that I squeak so loud. And I try to train this workforce that will squeak as well. He deserves better. He deserves better. He also helped to shift the definition of trauma for me. When I ask my students, or if I'm in a training and I say, is a child being placed in foster care a trauma? Inevitably, 100% of them will say yes. And then I tell the story of this little boy, and they realize that that's not the trauma. This boy's perception of being put in foster care was life-saving. It was a respite from the hell that he was living in. So it has helped to frame my definition of trauma. It has helped to reconceptualize what it means to have experienced adversity.